I want to bring up a guy who has helped us out with the Science Festival and helped us out in the Las Vegas Natural History Museum every time we've called. He is a staple in Las Vegas, a celebrity in our eyes. Channel 8's Nathan Tannebaum.
Hi everybody, how's it going? Well, I bet you can do better than that. Let's try that one more time. How's everybody doing? That's what I'm talking about. I don't want to diverge too far off the topic, but I did want to tell you it's going to be mostly clear this evening with a low in the mid-50s. But that's not why you're here. You're here because you love science, right? And it is so cool to see some young people here because you guys are future scientists. Let's hear it for the Girl Scouts that are here tonight. There you go. Troop 109, is that what it is? Troop 109. Now when Chris was talking about the UNLV Engineering College and their Senior Design Awards, he's not kidding about how cool that is. I have the honor and privilege of emceeing an event that they're doing on Friday night, so I won't be able to see the astronaut with the Science Festival. But on Friday night, UNLV hands out awards for their Senior Design Awards. These seniors put together these crazy projects that have the potential to be part of all of our lives, and you're welcome to come down there and see what these college students with smart brains and active imaginations are able to put their dreams into reality by working collaboratively with their fellow students and coming up with really cool stuff. So that's on Friday. But for tonight, we want to get this program underway. How many of you guys are familiar with a television series of programs called Roadtrip Nations? Anybody? Yeah. The entire Roadtrip Nations family. Well, to kick off tonight, before we bring up our panel to talk about women in STEAM, we wanted to introduce you to part of an episode of that series, and then afterwards we'll bring up one of our panel leaders and continue on with the evening. So one of the episodes of Roadtrip Nations is called A Balanced Equation. And the whole idea behind Roadtrip Nations is, I think a lot of them have been about college-aged people trying to discover where they want to go with their lives. And so, on that note, let's go ahead and watch a little bit of Roadtrip Nations, A Balanced Equation. So that's a show you want to check out, Roadtrip Nation. It shows on a lot of PBS stations across the country. I know that in the past there have been a couple of Roadtrip Nation programs on our local PBS station, Vegas PBS, KLVX Channel 10. But keep an eye out, and they're also online, roadtripnation.com. Check it out. How about a hand for Roadtrip Nation? So as we get ready to move on with our program this evening, I can tell you that one of those young women, one of the road trippers, is with us tonight. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. I want to introduce the woman who is going to lead you through this panel discussion on women in STEAM. She is a woman in STEAM herself. You guys watch Animal Planet? You ever heard of the show Finding Bigfoot? One of the co-hosts is with us. She is a research biologist. She's going to introduce the panel and lead the discussion. Would you please put your hands together and welcome Ranae Holland. Come on out here, Ranae.
Hello. everyone. I want to first of all thank all of you for taking the time to attend tonight's event. I do want to point out, this is the largest educational event in the state of Nevada, and that alone right there deserves some applause. Let's hear it for that. Okay, so tonight we are gathered to highlight women in STEAM. Now these speakers here represent leaders in fields of STEAM that aim to teach students to think critically and use science, technology, entertainment, art, and mathematics in imaginative designs or creative approaches to real-world problems, and simultaneously build on their mathematical and scientific bases. Now when Chris, where are you, Chris? Let's hear it for him. Let's have a hand for Chris Palladino. When he invited me to host tonight's panel, which by the way is sponsored by the Girl Scouts of Southern Nevada. Yeah, let's hear it for you guys. I realized I needed to do a little homework on Girl Scouts because you see, my prior experience with you guys was either using your cookies as bait for finding Bigfoot, or the one time, it was in Colorado, where we had a Girl Scout troop who came out with us and they did calls and we used that in the attempts to find Bigfoot. So whether or not we found him or not, you'll have to tune in. So all joking aside there, you guys, it was over a century ago that Juliet Daisy Gordon Lowe sparked a worldwide movement. She inspired girls to embrace together their individuality, strength, and intellect. That's what inspired them. Some 2.6 million girls now, 1.8 million Girl Scouts, and over 800,000 adult volunteers who believe the power of every girl can change the world. And to quote the website, Girl Scouts unleashes the girl, which is a go-getter, an innovator, a risk-taker, and a leader. And that's in all of you. Everything a Girl Scout does centers around STEM, the outdoors, which I love, and the development of life skills and entrepreneurship, and it's designed to meet her where she is now and to lead her on a path that she can grow on. The Girl Scouts have updated their badges to reflect the current times. That includes STEM activities such as digital arts, naturalists, and science and technology. But I'm kind of a little curious if maybe there's a Bigfoot badge we could have, like a Bigfooting badge. I think it could be a combination of curiosity, imagination, and naturalist. I don't know, I'm just saying, parents, maybe talk to a scout leader. Think about that. But I'm really here, you guys. I have to confess that I'm very envious that I missed the opportunity to be a Girl Scout myself, because I've learned that we share so many common core values, and honestly, I really missed the boat on that one. Because like so many of us here tonight, curiosity has driven us all of our lives. As a Girl Scout, you share a sense of curiosity and a belief that you can do anything. You turn the question of, can I, into a statement of, I will. And that is huge. Your shared belief and desire to do big things to make the world a better place is a trait that we need now and a lot more of. Because one of my favorite quotes is by Carl Sagan, says, every kid is born a natural, it's my favorite quote and I blew it. Every kid is born a natural scientist, and then we beat it out of them. A few of them trickle through the system with their sense of wonder and enthusiasm for science intact. But I have a new favorite quote, and it's by the Girl Scouts, and it says, girls are natural-born scientists. They look at the world around them with inquisitive eyes, experiment and push boundaries, and learn as they go. I may have never been a Girl Scout, you guys, but I feel like I was one, and I'm hoping I can go out with some more Girl Scout troops and maybe look for Bigfoot or be a junior naturalist or help you guys get some naturalist badges. Because just like you, our panel here today, and me, curiosity defines us all. It's driven me all my life. It's the reason I became a scientist. And I'm willing to bet it was a driving force, and still is, for these speakers here today as well. So without further ado, you guys, I want to introduce this year's Women in STEAM panel. On my left here, from Clemson University, excuse me, bioengineer Dr. Ann Foley. From the great wide north of Minnesota, a current pre-med student here at UNLV, we have Taylor Murray. From the panhandle of Idaho in the great state of potatoes, psychologist Dr. Rachel Robnett. And from another great state of Colorado, brewing manager and chemist Stephanie Palladino. Now, also from Colorado, powerhouse collaborator, I don't know if you recognize the face from Roadtrip Nation, we have Elicia Dennis. Now, a recent relocale from Colorado, there's a theme here tonight if you haven't noticed. Recently relocated from Colorado here to Vegas, the first female president of the Desert Research Institute, Dr. Kristen Averyt. And finally, Las Vegas native and classical concert pianist, Dr. Alexandra Lee. All right, so I just want to give a moment here. And would you like to talk and share a little bit about yourself here if you could?
Sure. Can you hear me? Am I close enough? Can you hear me?
I think you need to step up a little bit more there. Yeah, slide that on over.
Hi, my name is Ann Foley. I grew up in Massachusetts, and then I went to school in Chicago, and then I went to New York for a while. I've lived all over the United States. I think I knew that I wanted to be a scientist when I was in 5th grade, when I started to learn about biology and knew that I was really excited about learning about how the human body worked. And then got interested in lots of other things. Went to the University of Chicago. I thought I was going to be actually an art history major, and then decided in the end that I really did just love biology, and then I actually went to teach biology for some time. And then I did something which I think I'm going to recommend to all of you, which is I had an opportunity to go work in a science lab, and I spent a summer working with a scientist, and at the end of the summer I said, this is what I have to do for the rest of my life. This is the best thing in the world. So what I'm going to recommend to all of you is go and try being a scientist because it's so exciting. And I get to work on really cool things. So what I work on right now is, so you have your heart, and the heart pumps blood around your body. And you probably know that most of the time your heart beats pretty regular, but if you're, say, scared like I am right now, or you're exercising, your heart beats faster. Well, that's done by something called the pacemaker. The scientific name is the sinoatrial node, and I'm really interested, in my lab is really interested in understanding how cells know to become the sinoatrial node and not other types of cells in your body. And so I get to do this every day. We make beating cells growing in the lab all the time in my lab. And it's really exciting and really fulfilling work. And it's important because if all the things that I want to do work out really well, we might be able to use the knowledge that we gain to cure human disease. And that's what I'm really interested in.
Okay. Thank you, Ann.
So, I'm a little nervous being on a stage of so many amazing women like this, but so my name is Taylor Murray, as she mentioned, and I'm currently a student at UNLV, and I'm conducting undergraduate research at Nevada State College. And I'm pre-med, but I took a little bit of a non-traditional route after flip-flopping back and forth a few times with what to do. And I'm majoring in finance and biochemistry with a minor in psychology. Those are just 3 fields that I'm really interested in. And I'm doing research on anthrax, which everybody, when they hear that, they get really scared, but it's not that scary. I wear gloves, and the strain that we're using is the non-lethal. There is no documented cases of death from this yet, so hopefully I won't be the first. But and I've received multiple scholarships for my work, including a NASA scholarship and a scholarship from Embry, EPSCoR. And so a little bit about my background. I come from very humble beginnings, to put it lightly. It was kind of a situation where we're more worried about where our next meal would come from rather than academics. So academics wasn't huge for me growing up. It wasn't a huge focus. I also grew up believing the notion that girls aren't good at science and that, girls are good at writing or being pretty and, boys are the ones that are good at math. So I knew that I had always wanted to be a doctor, but by the time I made the decision to go to college, I was literally crippled by the fear of chemistry, which is now my favorite subject. But that fear was so crippling that it took me years to finally get enough courage to take a science class, and I think that's why this festival is so important, because I want my story to inspire underprivileged girls, girls who don't come from much, and I also want to show them that you can be whatever you want regardless of your upbringing. And I think that today in society there's a bit of a dichotomy that we believe that you can either be scientific or you can be a girly girl, and I really want to show that that's not the case. You can be whatever you want to be, and you can like lipstick while you cure cancer.
Thanks, Taylor.
All right, so I am so excited to be here. I'm a former Girl Scout, so I feel like I'm kind of coming full circle. Yeah, thank you. And so, how many daisies do we have in the house? How many brownies? Okay, how about juniors and seniors? Yes, I love it. Good representation across the board. So I got my silver award, which was one of the best experiences of my life. And one of my fondest memories growing up was going to one of these events with my Girl Scout troop. And we actually got to stay the night in a science museum. It was so cool. So I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm so thrilled to see all of you here. A little bit about me. I am a psychologist. I'm a professor at UNLV. And there's a lot of different types of psychologists. So I'm a research psychologist. That means that I use the scientific method to study human behavior. And one of the things that I study is the factors that get young people interested in science. And so that's another reason why I'm really excited to be here today. For instance, my research shows that participating in things like the science fair is great for sparking interest in science. Having friends who go to events like this with you are great. All of these things I get really enthusiastic about because I want to see more girls in science. I want to see more students of color in science. It's really important to me. And so a little bit about how I got to where I am today. I did not take a traditional path, and I think that'll be the case for many of us that speak today. And that's an important message. There's no one single pathway into a science career. So when I was a high school student and a middle school student, I was a jock. I didn't really care very much about school. I was on swim team, and that was really my main focus. And then in college, I took a psychology class, and I loved it. I hadn't realized that you could be a researcher. And for me, I studied gender. I didn't know that was a thing you could do. I had no idea that it could be my job to study gender. And all through my life, I was this person who would get into arguments with people about gender, and I would say, girls are great, girls are strong. I didn't realize this could be my career. And so once I realized that it could be my job, I was set. I found my passion, and then the academics fell into place. So I think that's another important thing to keep in mind is find your passion, and then oftentimes the rest of it will fall into place. As far as other things that I think are really important, enjoy your time in school. Enjoy the thrill of discovery. Every day of my life right now, I get to study something that I'm passionate about, and I get to discover something new, and it's so much fun. So don't lose that joy of discovery. It's really, really a wonderful thing to be doing with your life.
Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Stephanie, and for all you adults in the room, yes, I do make beer for a living. So I've been in the beer industry for about 12 years. I started off at Budweiser. I was a 21-year-old kid managing men who were older than my dad. So we'll talk about challenges later. And then I progressed all the way up to becoming an assistant brewmaster. And then I, 2 years ago, joined New Belgium, where I'm now the brewing manager, which means that I manage 1 million barrels of beer a year. 1 barrel is 32 gallons, to give you an idea of what that is. We have 28 brewers and 8 leadership members, and I get to be in charge of all of that, which means I monitor the quality, I make sure that we make everything consistent, and also I get to lead and develop a team and build the next leaders of making beer. I went to the University of Texas in Austin and loved chemistry because it was the hardest subject I had in high school. I loved every day trying to figure it out and seeing the gains that I got every day from continuing to study. So I liked that challenge, but I knew that I didn't want to be in a lab coat in a lab every day, and that's all I ever knew of a chemist, was that you wore goggles, you wore a white lab coat, that's what you did. And it wasn't until I explored other things that chemists could do that I realized that chemistry is all around us. Chemistry is everything that we do. If you're a chemist, you can make makeup, you can make yogurt, you can make beer. And that's really why I try and focus and come to these types of events, to make sure that people realize that being a scientist isn't one thing. And you're going to see that across the panel today, that science is really about learning to troubleshoot. It's learning to exercise your brain and think of things in a different way. And that's really the value it's brought to my life, and it's the value that I see in the world day in and day out. And that's why I think it's really important that we continue to foster environments for young women to make sure that they continue to challenge themselves and the world.
Definitely. Thank you, Stephanie.
I'm Elicia Dennis. You might recognize me from the Roadtrip Nation episode that you just watched. I'm going to start off by saying I'm actually slightly disappointed in myself because I realized that I could have been wearing glow-in-the-dark circuit board nails right now instead of the pale pink that I have on. They're at home. It was mostly because I didn't think they'd match my dress. That being said, at the time that we filmed the road trip, I was an electrical engineering major. And based off of that conversation with Dr. Hammonds, actually more than anything, I opted to almost follow in her footsteps. So I am now a sociology major with a minor in computer science, and I use computer science to study why our society is structured the way it is. And I want to understand specifically why we don't have women in the STEM fields and why we don't have minorities in the STEM fields at the rates of other groups. So a lot of this came from the fact that having a conversation with her made me think about things that I hadn't considered before, and I became curious. And my entire trajectory through academics and the work that I do has been curiosity. I went into electrical engineering because I wanted to understand how computers worked. I wanted to understand why circuit boards did what they did and how when you plugged a computer into the wall, it turned on and it gave you Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. I wanted to know why the electricity made things happen. And I still do love these things, and I still do. I'm currently building a LED display board that syncs with my Google Calendar to tell me where I'm supposed to be at any given point in time, because I'm not very good at remembering where I'm supposed to be at any given point in time. So I've never left this behind, and it is still a huge part of myself, but I understand now that by spending time in engineering and spending time doing the road trip, that I have a perspective on things that other people may not, and it's important for me to take that and lay the foundation so that the girls in this room have an easier time going into the STEM fields from here on out.
Thank you, Elisa.
Hi everyone, I'm Kristen Averyt, and I'm, as you mentioned, a recent transplant to Nevada. My husband and I actually live in Reno, but I'm really enjoying being here in the state, and go Knights, I just have to say. We know what's really happening. Great, yeah. I have to say, yeah, science is absolutely fascinating to me. I feel like I was the little kid that asked why and kept asking why, and I've never stopped. And I think my parents were so important and my teachers were so important because I think they finally got fed up with me asking why and just said, I don't know, go figure it out. And to this day, that's what I do. That's really what science is about. It's about the inquiry, and it's really about problem solving, and it's about curiosity, it's about exploration. And you know, when I really got interested in science, I was a kid, and it was the ocean. It was, I love the dolphins and the whales, which we all love, you know, it's a little, yes, exactly. And it was really fascinating to me. And I ended up studying oceanography in college. It's pretty excellent when you have to scuba dive because that's a requirement for your class. And that's really what, I've never stopped exploring, and to borrow a phrase from North Base. But I think, you know, I wanted to be an astronaut at one point. I applied for the astronaut program. I mean, these are the kind of things that stretch goals. Things that we need to be thinking about, wow, I really want to do this. And of course I can do that. And of course I can look at, wow, you know, I want to be the president of an institution. Yeah, of course I should be the president, right? Absolutely. And you know, along those lines, I just need to make this comment. DRI is 60 years old, and in 60 years, there's never been a woman president. I'm really proud to be serving in that role at this point, but the fact that, thank you, but the fact that it took 60 years is really disappointing to me. But I think I'm really, really optimistic about the future and what girls, women, what we're doing and how we're moving forward. And I will say, science, math is not scary. It's pretty amazing. And I will also say, I'm one of these people that was afraid of chemistry, and I got my PhD in chemistry, right? We conquer it.
Thank you, Kristen. Good evening. My name is Alex, and I am a classical concert pianist, native of Las Vegas. Yay! Yeah, a lot of Coloradans here on this panel. So what I do now is I still perform. I perform, and I also run a nonprofit that gives accessible musical experiences to at-risk communities. But where I started off was learning piano. Starting to learn piano at the age of 2.5. My mom is a piano teacher, so I was in music very seriously from a young age, and then I went off to New York to get 3 degrees in piano performance. During that time, I became resident pianist of Carnegie Hall, and I was sponsored for 2 years in outreach as well as normal concerts. So what that meant was I was able to play for all audiences. That meant that I was sponsored to play a concert inside prisons and rehabilitation centers and schools. So that was really eye-opening, and as a musician, you know, we wonder, you know, I think everyone here in this room listens to music. I'm going to make that assumption. It's accessible by everybody. And as a musician, when you start learning how to create music, play music, you're really sharing a part of yourself. And it's really a wonderful way to connect with everyone. It can transcend boundaries. So that's one of the things I do with my nonprofit, Notes with a Purpose, is we go into downtown homeless shelter, we'll go into elementary schools, and we'll take these musical experiences and really connect and see how it's important. And in relating to this panel, I almost feel like the black sheep because everyone easily says STEM, and I was like, oh, it's also STEAM too. But because I started, yes, STEAM. Because I started studying music at an early age, I found there was a lot of correlation between how easily I started grasping math. I saw patterns quite easily, and also the idea of seeing things from a different perspective. When you start studying music or the arts, you see a wider perspective. You become more creative in how you problem solve. You don't really see the same boundaries as you might have if you suddenly started thinking from a creative level. There are so many studies that show that taking music lessons or being in a music class creates more pathways in the brain. You know, both sides of your brains are talking to each other. And it's not surprising that a lot of scientists are also musicians or artists in some way. They create. So it's wonderful to be the A in STEAM. And I think that not everyone has to go into music as a career, but when you have it as a toolkit, or as a tool in your toolkit, you can really go out and find things to be more easily, I don't know, I guess the word is you can figure things out a lot more easily when you have the A within STEM. So, thank you.
Thank you.
back to my childhood, and I don't remember having a lot of scientists that were women, or, there were definitely artists, but within the field of science, technology, engineering, math, there weren't a lot of women. So I have to say, I may be envious that I was never a Girl Scout, but I'm so grateful that there are women here of different ages, different ethnicities, different backgrounds here on this panel to show you guys that you can do anything. You can be anything if you set your mind to it, definitely. A couple things, guys, I want to point out, besides Colorado, is curiosity. We all spoke about it, and the power of curiosity. Again, as I was saying earlier, it's why I became a scientist. When I was a little kid watching Bigfoot shows and reading the clippings, and I don't know, you guys won't remember, there was a show called In Search Of with my father. I remember he would set me on his lap, and instead of telling me what that was it a man in a suit? Was there an undiscovered species? He asked me what I thought. And that kind of clicked for me and set a tone where I decided to think, why do things work that way? And I realized, that's awesome. That's the way the world works. So I want to touch on something I think you were saying that was about finding your passion. So what are you curious about? Find your passion, and then find your mentor, and the rest will follow. The education will truly follow. Because one last point I want to make here before I start asking you guys some questions. Not all scientists or artists wear lab coats. I am somebody who is out in the woods in field gear and polypro, sitting in bear scat or tagging fish, or, it runs the gamut. Sometimes they've got the goggles and the lab coats, or they've got a pickaxe, or they've got field gear, or they have a piece of musical equipment. You never know, but it's really, you guys, sit down, remember, you can be anything. It's up to you. Now, with that being said, I got a couple questions I want to ask the panel here. I'm going to open this to all of you guys. One thing that I was curious about as you were mentioning your career, your background, what truly set your path is, what inspired you to become an artist, an engineer, a scientist?
I'm going to jump in on this one quickly, in that I was always curious. What inspired me was that why. It was that I wanted to understand what I was seeing and observing and experiencing, because on the surface the answer just wasn't right there, and I had to keep digging deeper. And I found that by studying engineering, it was giving me the means of learning more in a formal setting about what I was curious about. But with that, I'll also touch on the importance of representation, because one of the most profound moments of my life actually came through filming the road trip. For me, one of my first introductions to what it meant to be an engineer in some sorts or another was through the TV show Mythbusters, which I'm sure a lot of the adults are familiar with. The road trip was my opportunity to meet my childhood hero, Carrie Byron.
Yeah, let's hear it for Carrie.
And that representation was wildly important for me. And through Carrie, I actually just recently met Adam Savage last week, which was also an amazing moment. Cried a bit when I met Carrie too.
And Carrie is, I gotta say, also a great friend of mine. Touching back to, I think, what Taylor was saying, Carrie is aesthetically a long-haired, makeup-wearing, stereotypical feminine, beautiful woman. And she's a scientist, guys. She's out there kicking it, So, at a degree in art, she's multifaceted, and she is one of the most supportive people. She wants to reach out, get us all into science, and is a great, wonderful person. Thanks for talking about that. Okay, definitely. Thank you. I had to stop. That was my pause and read. Real quick, could everybody just take a moment and hand up those question cards so that Chris can pass through and grab those for you? Because I'm going to ask a few questions here, and then later on, we're going to be able to open those up and ask questions that you guys ask as well. Did anybody else want to touch on that question? Inspiration, yes, jump in.
So I'm going to just say I have a couple of inspirations. One is I had some really great science teachers when I was in elementary school, middle school, and high school. In fact, I had like a key teacher at every grade level that really got me interested in doing science and also convinced me that I could do science. And then I think I touched on this before, but when I really just made that leap and actually went and worked in a science lab and saw how it actually works and that it was something that I could do, that was a real inspiration to me. So.
Dennis Hofflander, That is the teacher that changed everything for me. I took every possible science course, and then during my graduation, we cried. We held each other and cried. And then I became, of course, the action nerd that I am today, but he was my biology teacher, and he had odd animal skulls. So as I traveled the world, I would collect various odd animal skulls, additional ones, and randomly keep bringing them back to him. And he's like, Ranae, you need to stop. My wife is upset with me, there's no more room. Anymore, I want to keep touching this. I want to know what, yeah, please, Kristen, what inspired you?
So I have to say there's two things that I find really inspiring about science. So the first is, I can remember back in graduate school, and it was one late night, and I was sitting in front of my computer, and I talked about the why questions and the whys, and I was crunching some numbers, and there was a moment, I had that aha moment where I discovered something, I figured something out, and at that moment in time, I was the only person in the world that had that insight, and I had that power and that knowledge of something that I had truly discovered. And it was something that I fell upon, and then I got to go out and share it with the world. And that moment of absolute discovery is just, you can't replicate it when it happens. And I bet it's happened for a lot of us researchers across the board. On the other side of the spectrum, I'm really passionate about making science matter. I'm really passionate about why it matters to every single person in this room. It's really important where I work now, and it's really important for me personally. I had the opportunity, I'm a climate scientist, that's what I've worked on for a long time, and I had the opportunity to work for the United Nations on climate policy internationally. So when you see your science being brought to bear and talked about in front of the United Nations to really frame large-scale policies and how we're gonna, oh golly, save the planet, that's a pretty powerful moment as well. Yeah. So science matters personally. It matters all of us. Just personally, it can be so inspiring, just, that moment of discovery, but also it really matters to everybody in this room.
It does. That is so true. That is such a good point. I have to think about, and I'm sorry, I lots of times have to relate my life the last 8 years back to Bigfoot. I keep teaching, yes. I keep trying to tell kids, if you wanted to find Bigfoot, if you that curiosity, is Bigfoot real? Who cares what 4 people on TV think, guys? You need 2 things to go look for Bigfoot. You need an adult if you're going outside, and you need the muscle between your ears. You need your brain. So no matter what age you are, whether you have a biological degree or a master's or a doctorate, I've been in a room with people who are far more educated than me, but I might have a different paradigm or perspective, and I will still put my 2 cents in because I might have a great idea. That's about being curious and creative and taking all of these realms and pulling them together and thinking critically and independently. I'm not going to go jump off of a bridge or walk off a cliff because somebody told me to. I'm going to think for myself. That's what science is about. Keep testing those established laws and theories. Guys, we used to think the Earth was flat. We used to think that the sun went around the Earth. There's a lot to learn. We have to be open-minded. I'm promoting skeptical science, guys, because it's real. Science is real, but so is skepticism.
And just to build off of that, Ranae, and that's one of the reasons I got into science is because that was the one class that you got to get out of your seat. And it was the one class you got to get messy with, and it was the one time my parents let me get dirty. Was in the name of science. And I think that for me, it was the hands-on, doing physics experiments, doing chemistry experiments, and really getting to see what made the things that I was questioning about. And so I think that's something that I want to continue, and as we have these young girls in the room, get messy, ask why, go and research and go and just see what is this made of. I took a lot of things apart, much to my mother's dismay, because I wanted to know what was underneath and the big why to that. And so for me, science was a way to interact with the world and really have it be a part of me and have it be something that I was solving, kind of like what you were saying.
Absolutely. Taylor.
I'll jump in. So a couple things inspired me. First of all, the challenge behind it. So I found myself, as I said, I didn't decide to pursue medicine right away. And I found myself just really skating through college, and it just wasn't a challenge. And I've always been somebody that's needed more and needed to be challenged. I keep using that word, sorry. But so I was terrified, but I felt ready to, kind of grab a hold of my fears and run with them, and it ended up working out. And also too,
I wanted to prove others wrong, because even to this day, I still get people saying, what are you doing that doctor thing for? Why don't you just be a model, or, or just something that to me is meaningless. Not to say that modeling isn't a good career, but, I think it's important to take your negative experiences and turn them around for a positive reason. So if you're, being told like you're not good enough, or you shouldn't do this, you should do that, I think it's important to take those negative experiences and use them for good. And so I want to prove people wrong.
Beautiful. Okay, I want to move on to another question if I can now. I spoke about who really kind of first ignited my curiosity, which was my father, and it stemmed off of wondering if Bigfoot was real, but who really enriched my curiosity for me was my high school biology teacher all throughout high school. So I want to ask you guys, was there someone in particular that enriched or really stoked not only maybe it's curiosity, but it's that career path?
It was one of my piano teachers right before I went to college. I actually flew to my piano lessons in San Jose, from here in Las Vegas, for 7 years. And it actually struck me as you were talking about experimentation. It's what I have done since the age of 3, since practicing piano, because when you practice piano, you can't play it the same way. You can't repetitively practice, otherwise it's not good practice. You have to ask questions constantly, so I felt that my entire career has been about experimentation and how to convey that. So that really came across from that teacher. She not only said, play it this way, she never said that. She said, why are we going to make it sound that way? What was the composer's intentions? And finding out all the ingredients that make for that connection musically, it's quite interesting. At the end of the day, music is tension and release. And I actually took ballet for about 7 years and realized that I had incorporated physics and ballet into my playing, and that a lot of my success in communicating the music I play is wrapping all of that together and putting that into music, because it really, at the end of the day, it's about tension and release.
I've never, and I love music, my family's full of music. Thank you for saying that. I've never actually heard, that's beautifully stated. I've never heard that quote before. I'm writing that down. Music and release. Please, more of you guys, share with me your inspiration, or excuse me, the person in particular that enriched and fed your curiosity.
So my parents deserve a lot of credit, because when I was growing up, they pushed me to think critically, and they would engage me in dialogue. So I would make a statement and they would want me to provide a little bit of evidence, and so that got me thinking like a scientist. I would also say that I had a professor for one of my psychology classes. He said, wow, it seems like you're really passionate about this gender thing. Do you want to join my research lab? And I was terrified. I was incredibly shy. I wasn't really sure of myself academically, but he kept pushing me and saying, you could do this, you could be good at this. And so at some point I just said, I've got to give it a try. And that was probably like the turning point for me academically, to realize, okay, like I can practice science. In fact, I really, really enjoy it.
And mine was also, my dad, he turned everything into science, whether or not I wanted him to or not. Prime example was, we lived in California, and it was his job to change the pool filter. And so he would take me out, and instead of just saying change the pool filter, he talked about the science behind how the pool filter worked. Strangely enough, a pool filter is just like a beer filter, so don't know if Dad was grooming me at a really early age, but it worked out well. Same thing when he taught me how to play soccer. He was teaching me how to kick a ball, and he talked about physics. The way you hit the ball this way is going to cause it to have a backspin. It's going to cause it to have more power. And he is really the person that made me realize that science is something you can apply day in and day out. And, you can take a 9-year-old and teach her how to change a pool filter, and she's not going to be totally pumped with you until she realizes on the first day of work, I know exactly how that machine works because he taught me.
Pardon the pun on the bear pump. Bear pump. Bang, nicely said.
So my inspiration and encouragement is multifaceted. I spent a lot of my early life living with my grandparents, And it's worth noting that my grandfather didn't finish middle school, but he did make a point of reading the newspaper with me every day. Pretty much every section of the newspaper with me every day. And I was a kid who, if you put something in front of me, I was probably going to read it anyhow, but he would talk to me about it. And yes, his education level maybe made it a little harder for him to go completely in depth with me on things, but it got me to start asking questions. And as I got older, I always had teachers who pushed me just a little bit harder. My 6th grade teacher, I still to this day call my mom and I live with her, and she's pushed me time and time again. It's probably worth noting that she has one of her degrees in sociology, and that's where I ended up. With that, my high school teachers made a world of difference. I'm thinking back on it, and I'm pretty sure my biology teacher in 2 years never once told me no. That did lead to us setting his classroom on fire one time. Got it infested with maggots another time. He never told me no, though, and because of that, I learned so much. If it did end up with him yelling at us a couple times at the end of the day. And my high school physics teacher pushed me, and he was the reason I ended up becoming the captain of the robotics team. And if I had never become the captain of the robotics team, I would have never gone into engineering, because I met my first electrical engineer when I was the captain of the robotics team because I was doing it. And teachers played a huge role in so many parts of my life because they filled the gaps where parents couldn't. But with that, even my parents in their various forms did the same for me. If they challenged me to ask questions or let me watch Mythbusters at a young age, even with some of the more questionable language, they just understood that it was something that I was learning from, even if it wasn't in a conventional way. And that made a huge difference for me as well.
So my inspiration, I think I had two main people that have kind of changed throughout the stages of my life. So my mom, I'm the first person in my family to go to college. So she didn't really have, she wasn't ever like, oh, you know, didn't know a lot about the college thing, but she always encouraged me to go after my dreams. And I would bring crazy ideas to her every day about a new career or a new sport I wanted to try or a new hobby, and she would never, ever, ever say that was silly, or, you know, she would always say, okay, do it. And so I think she gave me the confidence that I needed, even though it took a while for me to get to this point. She gave me the confidence I needed. And then when I finally took that chemistry class that I was terrified of taking, the professor there, her name is Dr. Howerton, and Dr. Howerton has tattoos everywhere, and she listens to Guns N' Roses in Boston and old, you guys are all too young for that, but, and she dresses super cute, and she's funny, and just a dynamic woman, and she just made the class so fun and so not scary. So that summer after I took that class, she said, you know, do you want to be on my research team, research anthrax? And I was like, to this day, I still have feelings of like not being good enough and like, I can't believe she asked me to do this. But she was definitely a huge factor and still is. Just constantly encouraging us. All of her students are female. And it's funny because like our little corner of the lab is like pink and there's like rhinestones and stuff. And but she has been a huge inspiration for me.
And that's an example of somebody blowing your stereotypes up. And one thing I also want to point out here is that we're talking about education. And education is so critical and important. The message I really want to send out to kids is that, A, of course, you can do anything you set your sights on. But it all comes back to what you were saying about find your passion, follow, and find your mentor, and education will follow. But it really all comes back to, guys, what makes you curious? What really makes you curious? But to speak to education, I just want to add one thing, is that once you're out of school, you never stop learning. That is what keeps you young. I held on to curiosity, and it kind of molded me, and I became a scientist, and I keep learning. And I think, Elicia, you're speaking to somebody who, you know, this mold of what is an educated person or is not. My grandmother is 105 years old, you guys. She was born in 1912, the same year that the Girl Scouts began. She's one of the smartest people I know, and growing up on a homestead in South Dakota, I don't think went past 8th grade, constantly doing crossword puzzles, constantly asking questions on how things work and connections to the natural world. Her spirit and her quick thinking Man, I hope I just have that much of her in me, because that's what keeps me going. But I want to hear a little bit more. Anybody else want to add in on that question?
Oh, I've got one. So I graduated from college. I had a degree in biology, but I didn't think that I wanted to be a research scientist. And I was teaching, actually, science, and still wasn't sure I wanted to be a scientist. And I met this woman named Bonnie Kaiser, who's been a scientist her whole life, and she said, you know what, you're the exact kind of person I want to be in a lab program that I'm doing this summer. And she basically convinced me to go and work in a research lab just for one summer that I told you about. And if she hadn't done that, I don't know that I would have gone to graduate school like that. And so she really was an inspirational person. So she was that person that opened that door, gave me that opportunity to go and work in a lab and actually see what it's all about. I had no idea what science was about before I started doing science. That's what I realized.
Yeah.
And so that's why I keep saying, go work in a lab. Go have that experience of doing science, and you'll be inspired.
And science is everywhere. Not all
science
scientists
is
wear
everywhere.
lab coats, and
Yeah.
the stereotypes are getting blown up left and right. Okay, I'm going to move on to another question here, you guys. What advice would you offer to your younger self? Their shoulders, they seemed weighted by that question. You know, if we could all jump in a time machine, and according to Back to the Future, you're not ever supposed to let yourself see each other because some kind of crazy thing happens, but if you could write a note and leave it, what would that advice be?
I don't think it was a problem with you ladies, but I had a problem asking questions, especially to authority, to say why. So I think it's important for everyone not to be afraid of asking questions, even if it may sound stupid.
So I would advise my younger self to mellow out. So I was totally freaked out about finding the one right path to the one right career. And that is kind of a myth, I think. So I spent a lot of time worrying about things that I did not need to worry about. So I wish I would have mellowed out a little bit.
I think touching on both of those points, the thing that I've been reflecting on a lot now that I'm coming to the end of college is, again, ask questions and don't be afraid to ask help, especially ask for help, especially because a lot of the people around you, their entire job is to help you. Teachers' job is to teach you. It's to help you learn the things you're interested in. And that's true when you get into high school and college as well. Asking questions is honestly maybe where you do most of your learning. It's not from reading the book, it's not from going to lectures, it's asking questions to get deeper and to understand it more. And with that, also, it's okay to change your mind and it's okay to not know where you're going. It took me a really long time to accept that I might have been more interested in one thing over another, or maybe being a pure electrical engineer with the intention of going into development for some firm somewhere along the way wasn't what I found the most fulfilling, and it was actually understanding people using those engineering skills that I enjoyed more. So changing course and understanding that your course doesn't have to match other people's. So I guess the final thing with that being, don't compare myself to others. Because when you compare yourself to others, you're never going to be the exact same as somebody else, so it's never going to be a fair comparison. And your own journey is going to give you different results and you're going to learn different lessons from them. So take your own path, don't compare yourself to others. It's okay to make mistakes because you learn from them.
I'm going to touch on what Elicia is saying. I'm sure somebody was waiting. That couldn't be spoken more true. If I found this time machine, I would go back. Come on, we all have our good days and bad days, right, guys? Just remember, if I could say anything to that self, stay true to myself. Be myself, ask those questions, love myself. In those moments when it's tough, don't worry guys, it gets better, it gets better. Doors open and close on opportunities, you miss one, another one's gonna come along. Stay true to you and you're gonna just amaze yourself later on because you can be anything if you stay true to yourself. It's so well said, Elicia.
I have a couple things that I would say to myself, and I think the first is school is amazing. You'll really appreciate it once you're no longer there. I think that's a very, learning is so important. Grades are important, yes, Grades are important, but the learning process, and it's amazing. If I could do it, I'd go back to school. I would spend a long time in school. Not too long, but yeah, it is an amazing experience, and so enjoy it. The second thing that I would say is don't let the boys get you down. It doesn't matter what grade you're in, it doesn't matter how old you are. Don't let other people intimidate you. It doesn't necessarily have to be boys. You belong where you are, and it's really, and own it. You know that you belong where you are. And the third thing that I would say is, you're probably better than them anyway.
Good point. It's not just the boys. I mean, we all have that capacity to be mean. We know we've done it. We've been kind, but in those moments when somebody's being mean to us, just remember it does get better. It does get better.
I'm going to go even a little further and say failure is good.
Yes.
Okay? So if I could leave a note to myself, it'd be like, don't be afraid to break stuff, try to figure out how it works, Like, take apart that clock and figure out how it works. Your parents won't like that advice, but when we're trying to solve problems, we try hundreds of things sometimes that fail before we find the thing that works. And so if you didn't accept the fact that failure was part of the game, then, then you'd have a hard time. So stuff is going to, fail. It's good.
No, that is, thank you, Anne, because that is so true. I mean, I don't have a quote here just, hiding in my pocket, but I think if you talk about extremely successful entrepreneurs, they will say it's all about all of the times that I failed before I finally succeeded. And it's, you're built on all those steps and the people that came before you. So excellent point. Thank you, Anne.
So I tell the people that work with me, I said, a beginner is someone who can get something to work. And an expert is someone who knows every possible way in which a thing can fail. From sad personal experience.
So don't get down, and failure makes you stronger. When you fall down in whatever capacity that is, socially, educationally, personally, dust yourself off, pick yourself up, and get back on the horse, bicycle, insert. Yeah. Well said. Yeah, well said. Okay, I'm going to move on to another question, unless anybody has one to add. Kind of coming here, speaking of failures, we'll roll right into what was your biggest obstacle on your career path? The room got, I'm getting harder and harder, I guess.
So my biggest obstacle was my upbringing. I don't talk about this a lot because it's kind of embarrassing, but I was actually a high school dropout for about a year or two because it was just financially too hard. And so it took me a little while. I'm a little bit behind the curve in the age range. I'll be an older med student because it took me a while to get back on track. Because it's hard once you leave the academic world. It's hard to get back in, just like finding the motivation and stuff. So I would say my upbringing really was my biggest challenge, which is why stuff like this is so important, because it's important to show girls who don't have all of the privileges and all the resources available to them that they can still do this. If it wasn't for FAFSA is our what would you call it, government aid?
Financial aid.
Yeah, this wouldn't be possible for me. So I would encourage anyone out there who maybe doesn't have everything to still pursue this, because you can do it. There will be resources available to you, financial resources, scholarships, stuff like that.
Okay, y'all got quiet, so I'll just throw myself out there. Oh, Elicia, please, no. Okay.
It was touched on a bit in the road trip as well. Taylor and I have very similar backgrounds, and even though my mother was in my life when I was growing, or at least in middle school and high school, I didn't actually move in with her until after I graduated from high school. And after my grandparents passed away, I lived in a very difficult home situation. And that was one of the biggest obstacles, was focusing on what I loved while trying to deal with everything else. And it's something that I'm still learning how to do, is how to balance life and my loves. So balancing what's going on in the background in a way that doesn't distract me from what I'm currently doing. And with that, it's also difficult when you're the only one. I've been thinking back on it, and up until I left electrical engineering, I was the only black woman in the entire department. And that's intimidating. It's much better in other departments. Computer science at Notre Dame is significantly better than electrical engineering. But Notre Dame is a school where I'm still one of the only ones. And I'm one of the only black women. I'm one of the only black women doing what I'm doing. And I'm the only black woman doing what I'm doing coming from the background I come from. That can be isolating. So finding community is something that I've had to learn how to do. And it can be a challenge when you're navigating a space that you're not at all familiar with. And I would also say, while the voices around me have told me that I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, or I can't do what I'm doing, sometimes after I internalize it, my biggest enemy becomes myself. And turning off that imposter syndrome that says that everything that I'm doing is actually a fraud, and that I'm not actually good, I don't actually belong, that's a challenge and that's an obstacle that takes a long time to overcome, and it takes a while to build that confidence if you don't start early. So that's something that's important, is you have to empower from an early age so that that voice doesn't become internalized and you don't have to fight those battles.
Absolutely what I was gonna say. It's like, see, it happens at all ages and the lessons keep coming back. My biggest obstacle was myself, because I stopped believing in myself. Because I was told when I was young by the people who loved me and supported me that you can do anything. You guys can do anything as long as you keep believing in yourself. Set yourself up, surround yourself with the right people, put yourself on that path. Find the curiosity, find the mentor, the education will follow, some doors will close, some will open. But when you fail, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and get back on that path. So well said, yeah, definitely.
And I think that community is really important. You know, when I first started, like I mentioned in my intro, I was a 21-year-old kid managing men that were as old as my dad. It was my first job, and I didn't know what to do in certain situations, and I was able to find a community of women that were able to kind of help me through that, being in a mostly male-dominated field and being as young as I was. And so I think that it's a powerful thing, no matter where you are and what field you're in, what age you are. You know, find people that you can talk to, that you feel, you know, you can kind of bounce ideas off of, and that it's supportive. You know, that was something that took me a long time to find, is that supportive group that continues to help you pick yourself up, or sometimes has to pick you up.
Anybody else? I think I'll move on to this last question here. We've talked about influencers and we've all had our personal mentors. If there was one influencer, dead or alive, that you could meet, who would that be and why? I'll give you guys a second, I'll share my own. I'm a restoration ecologist and a conservationist. So like Roosevelt's one of my favorite presidents, but I've been rereading all of John Muir's essays and poems. So for me, I would have to say the father of conservation, John Muir, would be who I would want to meet. And just have a dinner and then go on a hike and then just like grab his beard and just have fun, you know. But for me, it would be John Muir. You guys?
So I actually did this. So I tried to meet my maker, literally. So when I was in graduate school, I thought, who actually invented my field? So what I was studying was something called experimental embryology. So trying to understand how embryos grow. And I started to go back in the literature, and then I would like say, well, who taught them? And then I would see who had taught them, and then I would go back and look at the papers they had read. And I finally found, I'm pretty sure the origin of experimental embryology was in 1890, and the person who invented it is a woman called Miss Florence Peebles, and she was published as Miss Peebles. So I would love to go back and meet Miss Peebles. All right. That would be so cool.
Good one.
All right, so mine is Sally Ride. I think she was just absolutely one of my heroes. I actually just ordered the Women of NASA Lego set and just put that together in my office. I just have to say that. And so inspiring, and I'm really not kidding. I wish I could have been an astronaut. I'm way too old now, but that would have been amazing. And I just can't imagine being, again, that first woman. That's just so profound, and I just think about how difficult that must have been for somebody like her. But by golly, she did it and she owned it.
Yeah, good choice, good choice. Anyone else?
I would love to meet Admiral Grace Hopper. It's a name that a lot of people are starting to learn about because there's a number of awards and conferences named after her now, but for those of you who don't know, She was a naval scientist, researcher. Effectively, she pioneered a lot of programming back when it was punch cards and like machines that read your punches, almost like Scantrons that you poke holes in. And lore has it that she invented the phrase computer bug. Although that's been debunked, I still love the idea of her pulling a fly out with the tweezers from her cosmetic kit, because that was what was affecting her code. So she was a pioneer for a lot of the work that I'm doing now, and it would be important, I think, to hear her story and hear her insights and have a conversation about where it's gone on the foundation that she laid.
That's beautiful. I'm just realizing that I named a man for my influence. Rachel Carson was defining for me as well. I just want to say there's a lot of women. I just recently, after like gone through a thick book of John Muir's essays. So moving on.
I would love to meet Rosalind Franklin, which, for those of you who don't know, she was one of the people who discovered the structure of DNA and really didn't receive any credit for it and literally died in the name of her work because she was exposed to radiation, eventually passed away from it. And the men on her team at the time, refused to give her credit, and she was known to be quite a spitfire in the lab. So I would just love to hear her stories of some of the things that she said to these guys, because it sounds like she was like quite the fireball. And so I would just love to ask her, how she did it and how she felt about. I wish I could talk to her now, with her knowing everything that has happened, and just to see how she felt about that.
Yeah.
And so, first I was going to say Sally Ride. Then I was going to say Rosalind Franklin. Who I'll go with, though, who just popped into my mind, is a woman named Carol Greider, who won the Nobel in chemistry. And there's this beautiful picture of her when her name is announced, and she looks so happy and so excited, and her kids are there with her, supporting her and celebrating with her. And I just find it so moving and incredible that she was able to accomplish all of this, and she was a mother, and she pulled her kids into the fold. So I would love to meet her and talk with her about that.
And that's speaking to that time, where women, if they were married, let alone having children, would have to have this duality where they were handling and supporting the family and all of those traditional duties and being a scientist or an artist. It's like double duty is like all the more kick butt powerhouse. I think powerhouse was the word down here. Yeah, you had to, it's mind-boggling how many women were in scientific discoveries centuries going backwards who never received those acknowledgments, and we're only slightly, getting just kind of peel it back slowly like an onion and learn the contributions, and I hope it continues. Anyone else joining in? I think at this point, now that we got your great answers, we're gonna actually read, as I understand it, you guys had filled out some questions we want to ask the panel here.
I got the questions here, and I'm gonna want you to answer them too, so I'm going to ask them to get you involved. Before we get that, I want to acknowledge some people. Tony with the Windmill Library back here, can you raise your hand? I want to thank Tony for allowing us to come in. It was an event planner's dream to show up 2 hours early before an event, and it's already set up. And Tony's been great to us. And then Brittany with the Girl Scouts. Brittany, you want to raise your hand? And then also one of the founders of the Science Festival, Marion Gillespie, right there. All right, here we go. Did anyone on the panel go to an all-girls high school? No. What do you have to say about the gender pay gap in your field?
Well, musicians are just paid low anyways.
It is not closing fast enough, but it's interesting how in our society currently, politically, socioeconomically, now seems to be the time, and for me, it is what it is. I'm just grateful that it's happening. It's happening for you guys. That's the beauty of it. Acknowledgement of women in science, STEM, and the closing of the pay gap, that is affecting you guys, and don't let it widen again.
This is great, because this is actually what I study now.
There we go.
And there's a lot of discriminatory practices that people get away with because nobody's willing to call them out on it. And because it's getting so much publicity and the political climate is changing, it's important to keep being vocal about discrimination, and it's important to keep sharing with one another, because unfortunately you can't change what you don't acknowledge. And if women don't talk to one another, or men aren't willing to engage in the conversation as well to say, this is what we make and this is what women are making, you don't even know the pay gap is there. So studies have shown that there are instances in certain fields where the gap is up to 40% and people don't know it because there's no conversation about salaries. There's no standard to compare it to. So these conversations and this transparency has to be there for changes to happen.
Yeah, the importance of speaking earlier about communities staying together, recognizing the awareness of it, finding community, working together so that you can unite and stand up and close that gap.
I'd like to make one other comment related to that. So even if I'm doing the same job as the man sitting next to me, when you work in an organization, say there's 100 people in the organization, and maybe 15 are women, whenever there's a committee put together, the women disproportionately have to do more service activities and do more externally related sort of roles. So if there's a search committee, it's like, oh, well, we need some women on it. So that same group always gets tapped. So I also feel that as women in fields that are predominantly dominated by men, we also end up having a really devoting a lot of our time to service activities. These service activities are, of course, incredibly important, but particularly if you're in the sciences in a research sort of capacity, you end up spending less time on the research and really promoting, and your career can suffer because because so much time is being dedicated to administrative roles. And this is just something I think it's part of the discussion. It might not necessarily be about. It's an interesting artifact of wanting to achieve equity on these committees and being able to support diverse decision making in an organization, but at the same time you're kind of compromising some of the women and maybe underrepresented populations that might be part of your organization. And I think that's an emerging conversation that we're seeing that's tangentially, it's directly related to that pay gap. It's the responsibility gap.
Something. So I also think this goes back to the importance of doing your research on not only colleges that you go to, but also companies that you want to work for. Because I think things like social media are bringing about a lot more transparency for companies and schools. So you can tell when a school stands behind diversity and actively tries to promote diversity and things like that. At Nevada State College, we had a speaker from Columbia. Columbia is a great school, and they're all about diversity and things like that. And then as far as companies go, I know I just saw an article about Starbucks, how they just announced that they're officially closing the wage gap. So I think really research where you want to go and who you want to work for, because the information's out there.
Fantastic. I also forgot Sandra in our sound and light booth back there, who's made us look good and sound good. And also has been giving me hockey updates all night, so very important. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
I don't want to talk about it. How solid do your math skills need to be to do what you do, and what type of math is important in what you do?
Well, for me, with math, I think it is important. I do a lot of budgets, and there's a lot of troubleshooting that has to happen on the fly with one converting to the metric system, because that's how you brew beer, unfortunately. But more than that, I think, so I minored in math, and I think what my math background brings to my work is that, and I mentioned this earlier, is it helped me learn how to troubleshoot. A lot of advanced math is you get one problem and a full page to show your work, if you will. And it's a place for creativity. It's a place where I think we talked about this also earlier, where science meets art in that fact. But more than that, it lets you take one problem and really start to break it down to what you know and what you don't know, and to have that sense of pride and know that you can work through a problem. And that's my day-to-day. My day-to-day is we're making a batch of beer, and of course something goes wrong, so we have to troubleshoot it. So we talk about what do we know, what don't we know, what's the fix there. And I really attribute that to my math background, because that's what, in my mind, math is. It's breaking down a problem, however you want to get there.
So a lot of my research relies on math, using data science. I'm just using computers to do it. But I do have to know what to tell the computer to do. So with that, I will say one of the most valuable lessons I learned from the road trip actually happened in episode 2 when we visited NASA. And there's a NASA scientist now who admitted openly to failing calculus multiple times. It's important to note that she realized that part of the problem was she was afraid of asking for help. And the lesson that came from that I've internalized is if you're lacking in a skill but you love something, the skill can come. If you love it enough and you're passionate enough about it, you will do whatever it takes to make it happen and to overcome the difficulties that may come your way. So the key is to find something you love enough and you're passionate enough about that any challenges or any classes that you're struggling with, you will do whatever it takes to succeed. If that means going to office hours, if that means getting a tutor, if that means asking for help, if that means taking an online version of the class at the same time. I had to do that with biochemistry. I was taking an online version of the class at an Indian institution because the lectures were so much better than my regular ones. If that's what you have to do to succeed, do whatever it takes to make it happen. And sometimes it takes extra work in certain parts that you maybe aren't as strong in, but you can become strong in them with time and with effort.
And you can become strong, and it can be fun, and math should always be fun. And I know I'm touching back on the basics. People learn in different ways, you guys, and this all comes back to you can do and be anything you set your mind to. And if you go on a path of failure, don't give up, pick yourself up, dust yourself off. How do you learn? I learn differently than I'm willing to bet that these guys do. We all have our little strengths and weaknesses. Find that strength and apply that to your technique of learning math. And then, of course, later on in the education process, everybody's going to hit some hiccups of what's a little bit more of a struggle, so use your resources, but don't give up. But ultimately, math's fun. And by the way, it never goes away. It's everywhere. I'm just going to say, it's the truth. It is.
I also think we live in a great time as students because we have YouTube. And YouTube has probably gotten me through 99% of my courses. So you guys will find that math is not going to be an issue. Honestly, math is probably going to be the least of your worries in college. You're going to be more worried about how you're going to balance your social life and sleep and getting everything to eating. So it sounds weird to say, but I feel like there are more resources in college to get through the math classes than there are when you're younger. You've got tutors, you've got your classmates. It's a very supportive system, and like I said, YouTube.
Yeah. Don't get overwhelmed. I always say to kids who come up to me, whether they're wanting to go into conservation biology or biologists, I'll say, you know what? Don't worry about where you need to be 10 years down the line. Focus on where you are right now, what it matters to you, getting through that, whether it's a quarter at a time, semester at a time, a year at a time, and apply yourself right then, right now. And if you hit that hiccup, and you will, and it gets better, maybe you have to take that course over, or find a tutor, or do that, but make sure you learn that building block so you can build upon it and succeed, because you eventually will.
Yeah.
Here's a question that's written in very young handwriting, but I think it's broad enough. Why are women being left out?
Again, my research, it's great. I've always wanted opportunities to talk about this and don't. As Dr. Hammond's talked about, the way the fields are structured in terms of, I'm trying not to overcomplicate this. Our society puts extra weight or extra emphasis, or I guess extra value on certain fields, but to maintain that value, they almost have to be male-dominated because male-dominated is socially viewed as superior. Why are all of Wall Street's movies predominantly male-valued or male-dominated and look like they're very lucrative and very fun? It's because they want to give that perception. Unfortunately, we have to change our social means of creating value because a field like the STEM fields, the STEAM fields in general, because artists are incredibly valuable in our society. I firmly believe that. I don't want you to feel left out. I firmly believe artists are incredibly valued. We have to change how we value them because our work is important and it is changing lives and it's making a difference, but it doesn't get that same view sometimes just because we give value on a surface level, and we have to change where our emphasis and value comes from. It has to be in the meaning of the work, not who's doing the work.
And as we do that, as we've had in our culture here, so much of the political landscape is changing, and we are needing to acknowledge women. Doesn't mean that we diminish men. We need our male allies to stand up, and we need to collaborate and work together. We're asking for equality, not to tear men down. That's so important. I think somebody thinks that we are attacked. There's this defensiveness at times that we encounter. I much would appreciate a deeper conversation with you, Elicia, now knowing that this is your focus, that there has been, and I don't really want to go down this, which could be an all-out rabbit hole, but there is a history of women in science in the past. Sometimes women have to fight so hard to get there that sometimes collaboration was not supported, and I don't know enough about it to speak to it, but I'd love to talk with you more on that
I
later.
would just like to add one thing, which is women have never been excluded from science. Women have always contributed to science. If you go back and you look at the history and you look at publications of in the scientific literature, women are always there. What has happened over time is that women haven't always gotten the acknowledgement that they need, but that doesn't mean that the women weren't there. They were always there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I wanted to touch on, is that I think it's not necessarily women being left out, it's women not being visible. And I look at this panel and I see a couple of firsts, right? First presidents, and women starting to use their voice a little bit more, and maybe getting the recognition that they weren't given in the past. And that's something that I think is important in any field, is to have those female role models and those male role models, so people know what is possible. You know, and I think, like I said, I didn't know what a scientist was, let alone a female scientist. I just didn't know. I just thought I was in a lab coat because I didn't see what was out there and what was possible. And that is the great value in YouTube and other areas of the internet, is that our world is starting to open up a lot more. We're seeing where there's different fields, different subjects out there, and I think it's on all of us, of all genders, to make sure that we are being visible and showing the different possibilities.
So it's about that representation and then supporting our community.
Right, and I really appreciated the comment about it's not that women are being left out, it's also we've always been there, but also some women are choosing not to. Because I'll just flat out say, it is not easy to, you mentioned this earlier, it is not easy being the only woman or the only underrepresented population or person there. It is very difficult. And I'll tell you, we talk about glass ceilings, I'll tell you, it hurts. It hurts your head a little bit. It is not easy, and it's not for everybody, and it is difficult. And so there's easier paths where you can have just as much success and really feel just as fulfilled. But what I'm really proud about, and I think every woman on this panel represents this, is that we're making it a lot easier for everybody else down the pipeline.
Yep, absolutely.
So this is going to be our last question, and we're going to start with Anne and work our way down. I think this is an appropriate question. What advice do you have for young girls that you think is the one most important thing for them to know?
Just go and try it. You can do science every day of your life. You can be observing the world, you can be taking notes, you can be taking things apart to figure out how they work. Just do it.
My advice would be not to put yourself in a box. So if you're interested in multiple things, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're interested in sports and science, you can go for both. There's an old quote that I've heard, I might butcher it a little bit, but it's basically said, find 3 passions in life. One to make money, one to be creative with, and one to keep you healthy. And so even if you're super into one thing, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to make a career out of it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to trash it and only do one thing. So don't be afraid to be versatile and make one thing a hobby, but just keep trying, keep finding what you like, take different classes in college, and that way you'll really be able to find what your passion is.
And I guess what I would say is be passionate and be confident. If you really love something, then you belong in that domain. You deserve to be there. So follow your passion and recognize that it's yours. You own it. You should be there.
To continue on with that theme, go and explore, ask questions, figure out the why, and don't afraid to get messy. Don't afraid to really get in there and, like I said, get messy and figure out what's going on.
Never stop asking questions and learning, and never give up, because you can do anything.
Mine also actually comes from the road trip. I can't tell you which interview it was. Don't tell yourself no. If you want to do something, or it sounds interesting, or it sounds engaging, do it. I almost said no to the road trip, actually. And if I had, I think I would be mad at myself to this day, because it was the most formative experience of my life. Don't tell yourself no. If there's something you're interested in doing, but it's an application and you don't think you're going to get chosen, like I didn't think I was going to get chosen for the road trip, do it. That's somebody else's job. And the whole thing behind what we're doing is to make it easier so that you're getting that no less often anyway. But don't tell yourself no, and make sure you're always having fun. At the end of the day, there are going to be days where it's hard, there are going to be days where it's frustrating, but as long as you're having fun in the broad scheme of it all, and you love what you're doing and it sets your soul on fire and you're excited to sit down to do your work, you're doing the right thing in whatever form that may end up taking.
So don't let other people intimidate you or get you down. You're just as capable as the person sitting next to you, even though you might look different or be of a different gender or come from a different socioeconomic background. The ultimate equalizer really is education.
I love all those. There's a statistic that says that a woman won't apply for a job if she feels like she's if she's not qualified, but men will apply for it and feel that they're ready, even if they're maybe 60 or 70% meeting the qualifications. So I say to all young women, go for it. Go for it. Be confident in yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's give a hand to all of our speakers: Dan Foley, Taylor Brewery, Dr. Rachel Robnett, Stephanie Palladino, Elicia Pianist, Kristen, Averyt, Alexandra, and our host, Ranae Holland.